if Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, the ancient Stoics were transported into the current era, if they were just to look at the kind of culture of modern Stoicism, not any particular author or work, but just the kind of the overall landscape of modern Stoicism, do you think there would be any things that they would kind of disagree with, or think that people are doing well, or would want to inject more of something else into it? Like, how do you think they would interpret it?
I think they'd want there to be more graphic novels.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know. I've no idea. That would blow their minds, I think. They'd be like, what is this thing? I'm not sure what they would make of that. Although, weirdly, as an aside, one of our main historical sources for Marcus Aurelius is a thing called the Aurelian column, which is a huge column that has this circular frieze that spirals around it. And that's sequential art. It's like a precursor of modern graphics. So they are. Like, actually did kind of exist in Marcus Aurelius' time. They would look at us. That's a big question and a really interesting question. I think that there are a lot of things about modern society they would find kind of weird. I think they would think that we're very sheltered from our own sense of mortality. In fact, it's hard to know what to pick on. There's so many things. But I think one of them is that they would probably say, you guys don't really live sheltered lives. Like, you don't really see people die. You don't look after your dying relatives. You're not seeing infant mortality like we did. You're not serving in the military like at close quarters like we did. You guys are really sheltered from anything that reminds you of your own mortality. And I think that in that respect, they would think that we were missing something. That we were naive in that regard. They thought their contemporaries were naive in terms of burying their head in the sand about their own mortality. They're going to think we are far worse in that respect, for the most part, I believe. They would also think that we're stupid, and they'd be right, because for a reason that's, this idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah. Like, that in some areas, people don't know how stupid they are or how little they know because they don't have the technical knowledge to be able to appraise their lack of knowledge. So, like, someone who doesn't know how to do basic arithmetic is not even going to understand when someone explains to them how they're getting sums wrong. Because they're like, I don't even understand the explanation. I don't know how to do addition. I'm just guessing the numbers. And someone tries to explain how they're getting these calculations wrong. Like, not even the explanation's going over my head. So they don't even know how little they know. And it's hard to explain to them sometimes. Like, so we know in modern society, compared to an educated Greek or Roman, where most of us are woefully ignorant and about rhetoric and logic, and they would think we're kind of thick as two short bricks in that regard. Frankly, they'd be like, "Do you guys not understand common informal fallacy? Like, you guys keep on the." They'd look at us on the internet and they'd think, "You guys are making the same childlike errors of reasoning over and over again." Like, they think our political debates are infantile. I mean, these things happened in their time, but educated people were more cognizant of what was going on. So, like, ad hominem fallacies, overgeneralization, causal fallacies, modal fallacies, they knew how to reason, like, technically, in the same way that we know how to do a division and multiplication and stuff. They knew how to use logic, and they look at like what we were doing and think, you guys are like, you don't even understand like how to think straight. Like, it's shocking. They'd have a field day with podcasts. Like, I think Marcus Aurelius. Joe Rogan did the podcast recently about how he loves Marcus Aurelius. I think if Marcus Aurelius watched Joe Rogan's podcast, he it would make him weep. Like the level of stupidity on show and like, you know, crass ignorance and just like absurd, like illogical, like reasoning on display and constant head banging against the wall, abuse of the causal fallacy when talking about things like research and COVID vaccines. I mean, Marcus Aurelius doesn't even know anything about scientific life, but he'd understand the you know, the sort of shoddy reasoning that's on display immediately, I think. Like Epictetus, like ancient philosophers studied dialectic. They trained. Marcus spent decades training in rhetoric, and so when you train in rhetoric, you understand. You learn how to manipulate people, and rhetoric and logic are two sides of the same coin. So you when you learn logic, you learn how to spot logical fallacies, and when you learn rhetoric, you learn how to exploit logical fallacies. Like, you know, it's the two sides of the same thing, right? And Marcus had trained for decades with the leading thinkers of his era in logic and rhetoric. So these guys are way ahead of us. Like, in terms of, you know, it's funny because we normally think of progress in the sciences. Yeah. But, like, I mean, even if you're a philosophy graduate, you know, you do, like, you know, a few classes in logic, and you employ Socratic method and philosophical reasoning kind of like for a few years in seminars and stuff like that. Nothing like the level at which ancient Greek and Roman philosophers were doing it on a daily basis for decades of their lives. They would wipe the floor with us easily in that regard. And they would watch Joe Rogan and they would watch CNN and Fox and all the other garbage that we consume and think that it was amazing that we've taken such a step backwards and we're now reasoning like, you know, we like idiots. Like they think we'd regressed compared to them and had become imbeciles. Like that's my honest opinion. I really, honestly, if Marcus Aurelius was here today, he'd look at the internet and think, how did we end up being so stupid? Like, how come these people can't spot, like, you know, the use of sophistry? Like, has nobody taught them, like, you know, how to spot overgeneralizations and arguments and black and white reasoning and, you know, all these kind of things? The internet's full of people, like, using the ad hominem argument and stuff. Like, politicians do it all the time. Like, but Greeks and Romans would just laugh at that. Like, but we've regressed back into, like, being duped by it. So logic needs to come to our rescue. Like, you know, that really is one of the main weaknesses in modern society. You know, I think everyone's aware that political discourse is like a car crash, right? It's got a dumpster fire, right? On social media. I think it's fair to say. American political and Britain, most countries, maybe not everywhere in the world, but like political debate is farcical. I think like the ancient Greeks and Romans would have a lot to say about that. I mean, they had to deal with these things, but they understood what was going on around them. Like, they weren't as gullible as they think we're gullible by comparison. I'm sure of that.
Wow. Yeah, I feel both dumb, but also very inspired to go and start looking at logic and rhetoric. So,
the basic thing, the starting point, I think, it's almost like logic, I think, is taught a little bit back to front. Like, we just need to learn about common fallacies. Like, most people actually start looking at philosophy, learn about things like the ad hominem fallacy. Yeah. So you see in debates, people will go, somebody will follow an argument and they'll go, well, that guy's a Nazi. Like, and you'll think, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't mean to say that the thing that he said, like, whether or not that's true, or nowadays it's like that politician's like a pedophilia or something like that, or like whatever. Like, so insults are thrown, accusations are thrown at people that detract from the content of what they're actually saying. Like, and people will reject an argument based on who said it, rather than whether or not the thing that they say is logical or there's evidence for it. Like, so that's the ad hominem fallacy, right? It's all over the internet, like on a like hour by hour basis. Like, so I think, you know, just kind of spotting stuff like that is more important. Like the help, by the way, medical, like any cognitive therapist, it's evidence-based practice. We're trained and we have to read research studies. Like the media exploit a fallacy called the causal fallacy every day in reporting medical research, and you know, like that they confuse correlation and causation. Like it's their favorite thing to do over and over and over again. As an aside, I'd say to people, look up causal fallacies and look at the fallacy of confusing correlation and causation. It's fairly simple. And then you'll see like a lot of the health reporting, like the reporting of medical research, is garbage. Like, and it's just distorting and exploiting information in order to freak people out. It's a big problem for public health in our society. But I don't think the ancient Stoics would have understood that, because this is a problem more prominent in relation to modern scientific research. But it's a big problem in our society. Like we're being fed not just misinformation, but like it's like these guys are saying 1 + 1 = 3 or something. Like the stuff they're saying is just completely nonsensical. But it happens over and over and over. Joe Rogan has a career built out of doing this, pretty much. Like, you know, he's not the only one. He's picking on him because he's the biggest one, right? But like, there's loads of other people. The media's full of it. Like, you know, tabloid newspapers have been doing this for decades on a huge scale. But it's time that people became more educated about basic misinformation and health research, I think. So that's one of them, like, you know, that people should arm themselves with. The Stoics thought we have to study logic in order to defend ourselves against misinformation. Like, that was their argument for it. The Cynics didn't study logic. And then the Stoics' argument is, no, well, the thing is, if you don't study logic, then you're vulnerable, like, to people manipulating you with, like, rhetoric. Like, you know, you'll fall prey to sophists then. Like, so at the very least, you need to understand enough to protect yourself. That's really part of what ancient philosophy was about, but that aspect of it is kind of almost defunct now.
I love that frame. Logic is sort of psychological self-defense. That's it's a really powerful one.